Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. That was me making fun of myself for using 3 cell phones at a time.
不是真的 utensil，
This is from the first leg of our travels to Croatia. We had a 5-hour layover in Frankfurt, and I was really tempted to find the gym at the airport because since I knew the layover was going to be so long, I wanted to try to get a session in, but I also didn't know what the situation would be like when you're traveling internationally. Sometimes you have to be in certain terminals, and the gym wasn't in the terminal that we were in. So once we checked out of the one we arrived in and checked back in, it just wasn't really practical to go find another terminal to train at. And also, I read the gym was kind of small. So I included a clip of us landing in Croatia, and it was so beautiful. I was basically awake for most of the first leg of the travels, couldn't really sleep because when we left it was daytime. And so that 1 hour small flight from Frankfurt to Dubrovnik, I actually fell asleep so hard. And then when we were getting a ride to the hotel, I was dozing off, but the view was so beautiful. I'm glad I caught a little bit of it, even though I was kind of half asleep at that point and had been awake for well over 24 hours.
The Forbidden Atlas Stones.
We started our trip with a Game of Thrones tour. My mom has watched 1 episode ever of Game of Thrones, and I tried to ignore its existence until the last season was being released, and then I started watching the first season and managed to catch up right as the last season was airing, and then I went and read all the books, and then I got really into Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, which is coming out pretty soon, the second season, that is. And so going to Dubrovnik was magical for me because it felt like I was just on set for Game of Thrones, and I had heard, it's pretty small, like the tour can be done in just a couple hours. There's really not too much to see, but to me, it was so awesome knowing that the actors and actresses shot here, they filmed here. I could see the actual parts that they used, even if they had to green screen or blow up certain things to make them look bigger. It was so awesome to see. So the weekend that we visited happened to be pretty busy because there was a cruise ship there, so all of their people were walking around for the day, and then there was also some kind of run. It was a really big international running event, so they closed down parts of the city walls for part of the day, and it was just kind of a crowded time because we went during low season. We also picked this time of year because it wouldn't be too hot yet, and also selfishly it fits in for training for my next meet. It gave me a chance to come back and still have like 15 solid weeks to train leading up to nationals. As we were going on our tour, which I found on Airbnb, there were lots of other tours that were similar at the same time, and the guides kind of had slightly different images to reference. So I think if you do go there, the different tours do cover different scenes, but our guide was pretty good and she showed us some of the main points of interest, and I think she probably does this tour multiple times a week and sometimes multiple times a day. And you can tell that these people, or at least our guide, was a huge fan of Game of Thrones and knew the lore, and that's part of what makes it so cool, is to have someone who is so into it describe what happened in the city that they live in. So they're a local here, they got to see the show being shot and before the tours were a thing, because obviously before Game of Thrones was shot here, the city wasn't known for being the site that Game of Thrones was filmed at. So she, as a fan, got to watch the shooting happen and then now be able to describe to us what it was like. So after the walking tour, which took about 2 to 3 hours, we did our own walking tour of the city walls. And for the city walls, once you start, you have to commit to either finishing the whole loop or you can get off halfway. But it's one direction only, and I would recommend picking a time of day that isn't too hot because you just get direct sun exposure. And make sure you bring water and have good walking shoes because it is lots of steps and there's a lot of steep uphill surfaces. The first couple days of our trip were definitely some of my favorites, and it was kind of hard to start off with these were the highlights of the trip, and they happened together and they happened in the beginning. But I do plan on documenting this whole trip, and I'm just gonna roll out little segments. Looking back, I'm so grateful for the great weather that we had because as I'm home and going over footage, I'm checking the weather just out of curiosity to see what it's like a few weeks after we left. And there are actually more days than I would have guessed with rain. And while you're doing these all day on your feet adventures, you have to keep in mind how much water you need for the day and snacks in my case, as well as clothing layers, because when it gets hot in the afternoon, having long sleeves actually kind of feels good so you're not just constantly getting sun exposure, but then as soon as the sun goes down, it's good to have that down jacket rolled up in your bag. This is the view from on top of the city walls, and you can also watch and look up and see people walking while you're down there. It's kind of trippy.
Get a room, guys. Meow. These are the ocean cats.
This is from the second half of our loop. You can start at 2 different locations, so you usually would end up where you started unless you only do half the loop. And there was a point where it looked like we could go down, but we would be exiting the city walls walk and maybe get closer to the water. And when I packed for this trip, I was picturing bikinis every day, being in the water, bikinis all the time, and this actually turned out to be mostly sightseeing and maybe a couple bikinis, but mostly sightseeing. And if I ever do get to go back, I'd like to spend more time in the water. Bones, bones, game of bones, bones, game of bones. We finished off our night walking around trying to find a good place for dinner. This was outside one of the restaurants. I found this kind of weird looking storage thing where there was no one inside, but there was a giant fish. So that's me standing next to it for reference. The next day, we started off with the Rector's Palace, and we did not get to go and stand next to the stairs the previous day during our Game of Thrones tour, so it was really neat to be able to go in and stand right there where the scene was shot. And I'm not going to put in all the different locations and what they were in the show because I feel like that would be taking away from what the local tour guides are doing, but I included pretty much every scene that we did actually get to see in person. So upon arrival to Lokrum Island, just a short ferry ride away from the main shore, there's this beautiful peacock and it's trying to do seduction, so I actually got to see a few tail feather shaking dances. So it was pretty intense. I did not know that they were loud like that, but the peacocks on this island were beautiful, and they even just kind of walk up to you when you're in a restaurant and they're not that scared of people. We visited Lokrum Island the day that part of the city would be closed due to the run, and so it was good timing. We didn't really know what to expect, but we ended up spending about 6 hours just walking around. One of the first places we stopped at was the Dead Sea, and there were lots of people dipping their feet and swimming. And then we went a little bit further and we found a bunch of rocks and then also a really good view out into the water. On the map, we saw that this would be near the rock arch, and there wasn't a good sign or any markings that really told us where to go. We just happened to find a couple of dudes who were kind of maybe a little bit tipsy walking towards some rocks that kind of looked like there was nothing there. And so we kind of walked in that direction too, and then we found the most beautiful view. This rock arch is really neat because you can go on top of it. There's a narrow bridge. It kind of may make your legs feel a little jello-y. You can see my mom standing at the top. She walked across it and posed there, while some people that we met were posing at the bottom. And then I noticed that it was possible to get to where the arch is, and so I decided I would just check out the water temperature and try to make my way over there.
I'll tell you what, fucking scary up here. Really? Oh yeah.
Though it actually isn't that cold. It's a little bit slippery at the bottom, and it's definitely easier to just walk and climb your way across than to swim, because then by the time you get to the other side, you're not freezing.
Wow, she's doing it.
It is not the most graceful crawl, and I kind of think they don't mark this area really well because I don't think it's safe for people who don't have a good sense of balance or can't swim. This was the most scenic area of the island, and then we went on a really long hike to try to find this fort. It said there was a fortress on the map, and I couldn't find it. What's up, dude? Hello. You're a big chicken. You're... You woke Knowledge up from her nap, dude. Yeah. Dinosaur. Ooh. Goodbye.
它抖一抖就跑走了，还没开。
Bye bye. Ooh, there's another guy.
I think those two are going to meet each other.
We had some time to rest our feet, and then I was looking through some of the pictures we took, and I really wanted to drive my mother mad by going back to the place with the rocks because I wanted to get a better shot. I really wanted to see what was just a little bit beyond those rocks right behind me, but I also wasn't really confident that there'd be any way to come back if I did, end up falling in the water.
Slowly?
So I didn't.
I know, it's like a hidden secret. There you go.
We took the ferry back to the old town, and a tip if you are visiting, make sure you know when the last ferry leaves. I don't think the time is the same all year round, so just make sure you don't miss the last ferry. If you type in King's Landing in Google Maps, this is where it takes you. I kind of thought there might be something more, but just in case, I wanted to check it out. And that was a brief shot of the sunset, and this is a museum, an art museum. I wanted to check out at least one museum while we could. I mean, we didn't really have too much extra time, but we did buy a city pass that included admission to a lot of museums, and this one was one that was open later, and some of the art was pretty neat. Some of it was a little spooky. Dubrovnik at night is really, really pretty. It's super clean there. It feels super safe. Public transportation is very accessible. You can kind of Uber to wherever you need to be, so it's super convenient. And then we started our gelato a day that will continue for the rest of this trip. And there are lots of actual dragons in King's Landing, but they're more like pigeons and they poop on you. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to sharing more of these adventures with you.